I've been putting off these lessons for a while, but it's time to talk about modes. I've been making lessons here on the Prog School for over 3 years, and I've purposely never done a really detailed series of lessons on modes. Firstly, because I think there's already tons of great lessons here on YouTube about modes, and secondly, I think musicians, especially guitarists, put way too much emphasis on modes. That being said, modes are super useful, especially in prog, and I think I have at least a somewhat unique way of thinking about them and using them, so for the next 8 weeks I'll be doing a serious deep dive into modes. This will be covering specifically the major scale modes, sometimes called the church modes. You can make modes from other scales, harmonic minor, melodic minor, etc., but when most people are talking about modes, they're usually talking about the major scale modes. This first lesson is a crash course on constructing the modes and how I think about them, and for the next 7 weeks I'll be putting out 1 lesson a week covering each of the 7 major scale modes individually. I've also made backing tracks for each of the modes, as well as 5 cool licks to go along with those backing tracks. So lots of stuff coming from me in the next few months. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification to stay up to date with all of these videos as they drop. So what are modes? The simplest explanation is to take a major scale and start and end on a different note. C major, for example, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, but I'll start it on D, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and that's the D Dorian mode. It's super important that you're familiar with major scales before jumping into this modal idea. It's one of the reasons I don't teach most of my students right away, because often they lack a good understanding of the major scale. Now, if you take anything away from this lesson, it's this: modes are scales. And just like a major scale has a specific sound and mood, each of these modes have their own unique sound. They are theoretically derived from the major scale, but they're very much their own scales. And once I really understood that was when I was able to take these modes and use them more effectively in my own music. I'm going to show you how each of these modes are constructed, and then I'll show you a better way to think about them and explain why I think so many people get confused about modes. Let's continue the example from earlier using the C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. The major scale can also be called the Ionian mode, although that's not super common in most situations. But let's take that major scale and start it on the second note, D. And that's the Dorian mode. If you start on the third note, E, you have the Phrygian mode. If you start on the fourth note, F, you have the Lydian mode. If you start on the fifth note, G, you have the Mixolydian mode. Start on the sixth note, A, and you have the Aeolian mode. And if you start on the seventh note, B, you have the Locrian mode, or if you're British, the Locrian mode. So there are the 7 modes in order: Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. And that order is important to memorize. It'll help you understand how each of these is constructed. This is how I first learned modes, and in some ways it was a good way to learn them. As a guitarist, I could take this major scale I already knew, start on a different note, and bam, I was playing modes. But this approach has some drawbacks. Remember, modes are scales, and if your only reference for a mode is the major scale it comes from, you're not thinking about that mode's specific characteristics and sound, you're thinking about the major scale. And this is where I found myself at first. I understood how the modes were built and how I could play them, but I didn't really understand how they sounded or how I could use them. And that brings up what I think is the best way to really get to know the sound of the modes, and that's to start them all on the same root note. So instead of C Ionian, D Dorian, E Phrygian, you do C Ionian, C Dorian, and C Phrygian. Starting each mode from the same root note is more complicated to figure out because the modes no longer share all of the same notes, but it is the clearest way to hear the differences between the modes and to start to get a feel for the sound and vibe of each mode. Using the major scale as the starting point, which is the common approach when labeling our scale intervals, here are the modes and how they differ from the major scale. Dorian has a flattened 3rd and 7th, E flat, and B flat. Now I'm going to play the C major scale and the C Dorian mode over this C drone. Right off the bat, you can very clearly hear the differences between these two scales this way. Those two lowered notes make Dorian sound considerably darker than the major scale. Phrygian has a lowered 2nd, 3rd, 6th, and 7th. C Phrygian is C, D flat, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat. Lydian has a raised 4th. C Lydian is C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B. Mixolydian has a lowered 7th. C Mixolydian is C, D, E, F, G, A, B flat. Aeolian has a lowered 3rd, 6th, and 7th. C Aeolian is C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat. And Locrian has a lowered 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 6th, and 7th. C Locrian is C, D flat, E flat, F, G flat, A flat, B flat. One of the best ways to start to understand the sound of each of these is to switch between them over the same low drone note. I'm going to start with the major scale, C major. How about Aeolian? Phrygian? Lydian? Mixolydian? Locrian? Dorian? Notice that some of these sound pretty dark and some of them sound much brighter. So instead of ordering modes like they're found in the major scale, Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, etc., I prefer to order them from brightest to darkest. Now the order is Lydian, Ionian, Mixolydian, Dorian, Aeolian, Phrygian, Locrian. Notice that each mode in this order has only one note different from the mode that's next to it on either side. The modes with raised notes, which is only Lydian in this case, are on the bright side of the major scale, and as more flats are added, the darker the modes get in sound. And this is the way that I think about major scale modes now. They're all their own scale sounds which can produce various moods and emotions, and I can choose which one to use based on the sound I'm going for. If I want something darker and heavier, I might go with Phrygian. If I want a brighter, more uplifting sound, I might go with Lydian. And for a bluesy funk sound, I might choose a Dorian or a Mixolydian. Now, each of these modes have even more specific characteristics and uses, which I'll cover in the individual lessons on each mode in the coming weeks. But there's your crash course introduction to the major scale modes and how I like to think about them. Modes are popular for a reason. They sound great and they're a really useful compositional tool, and I use them all the time, and once I understood their differences and their individual sounds, I was able to create a lot of cool music with them. Next week, I'll be doing a deep dive into the Lydian mode and then covering all of the rest of the modes in the following weeks. If you enjoyed this lesson, subscribe, hit the bell notification, like, comment, share, and I'll see you all next week. Till then, stay proggy.